Hey everyone, welcome to lecture 6. We're going to be talking about networking today, and there's two parts to this lecture. The next part will be next week. I'll be lecturing for both of these lectures. And for this networking lecture, we're just going to be talking about what exactly networking is and how we'd integrate it. And then for the next lecture, we're going to actually integrate the networking into an iOS app. So before we start, let's go into review with collection views. So what is one reason you'd use a collection view over a table view? A doesn't seem to be right because they aren't the same thing. For B, you can display rows instead of a grid more easily with a collection view. That's not really true. A table view is just a series of rows, so it seems more logical to use a table view for that. C says you can scroll in both directions and use a grid layout. That seems to be true. You can scroll in horizontal or vertical directions with collection views. You can also use a grid layout for that, just as you did for project 5. And D says collection views are easier to set up, and that's not true because while table view, you only have to set up the table view, you also have to set up a collection view layout, a flow layout for the collection view. So the answer is C. Second question, how do you set the spacing of a collection view? So here we have some collection view, which equals UI collection view. And then A is accessing a property called minimum line spacing, which is equal to 10. B accesses a property called minimum inter-item spacing, which is also equal to 10. And C says you can't, you need to set the spacing of the layout. Well, it turns out the answer is C, because you don't set the layouts through, or you don't set the spacing of a collection view through the collection view directly. That's what you set up the flow layout for, so that you can set the spacing and other things about how this collection view is laid out in that variable. Great. Okay, so this is what we're going to be talking about. We're going to start with networking, explain why we would want to use networking in an iOS app. Then we're going to talk about HTTP requests, which are going to help us communicate with servers with our iOS app client. Then we're going to be talking about external libraries, which are going to make our lives much easier when integrating networking in our iOS apps, and how CocoaPods helps us install external libraries. And we're going to be talking about closures last, and that's actually what your assignment will be on this week. So let's start with networking. And the basics of networking is that you're just going to connect your app to the internet, which right now we have not done that yet. So why would we want to connect our apps to the internet? Well, I mean, it seems pretty obvious, but take a look at these apps. So on the left, you have Facebook, then you have Gmail in the middle, and you have Google on the right. If you weren't able to connect to the internet, you wouldn't be able to access posts from other people. You wouldn't be able to see your emails, and you wouldn't be able to search things up on Google. That stuff is stored on a server, and you wouldn't be able to access it without internet connection. So let's look at the middle, Gmail. How would we represent that the way we've been representing our dummy data? Well, here you would just have, for example, considering just 2 emails, we can have an email which is has a title, there's a content, and you can check to see if it's starred on your email list. We can have another one, and then we'd put it inside of an emails list, which we'd use as a data source for either a table view or a collection view. In this case, it'd be a table view because it has rows, and a table view would be easier to set up for this layout. So how have we been doing this in the course so far? We always create our model. We create an array of those email objects, and then we want to use a table view or collection view with that array as a data source, just as I've said. But what are some issues with the way we've been doing that? First off, we need to manually define and create this data. So if we want to add new data too, right, we need to add that data, and then we need to rerun the app, right, which is not feasible if you were to push this app to the App Store, and then you need to add new data. You'd have to update your app, and that's not really good. And you also need to store the data locally on your app. So you can't really share your data to other people because you don't have internet connection. And that's why we use networking, to resolve all of these issues. So first off, how do we connect our apps to the internet? And that's actually through HTTP requests. So basically, with HTTP requests, you can communicate with clients to servers through the internet. And what exactly does that mean? Well, let's get some formal definitions. The internet is just a network of computers that communicate with one another. You have your client, and that client is going to call on a service, and servers are the things that are called. So your iOS app is the client, and it would access a server by calling that server. So there's a couple types of HTTP requests, though the main ones that you need to know are GET requests, POST requests, and DELETE requests. There's a bunch more that you'll be able to see on Postman, but these are the three that we're going to be using, and they're the most commonly used as well. So with GET requests, you use them to retrieve or just get data from the server. With POST requests, that's how you post or send data so that you can actually create or update some kind of model on the server. And then with delete, that's pretty self-explanatory. You just delete a model. So you'll notice here that we have create, retrieve, update, and delete. Those are the 4 things that we're going to be able to do through networking with a server. And if you want to remember these 4 things, you can just get the first letter of each of these words, and it spells out CRUD. And the reason this is important is because CRUD APIs are what we teach in the backend course, and that's the framework that you're going to be working with. So you should be familiar with this when you go into Hack Challenge, because this is the kind of API that you're going to be working with. So how do we actually communicate with servers? So to communicate with a server, you're going to use a JSON, if you've heard of that before. It's just a JavaScript object notation. And basically it's just a dictionary where the keys are always strings, and then your values can be other strings or other JSONs, so just other objects inside of a JSON. You can have numbers in there too, true or false Booleans, arrays, or it can just be null, that there's nothing there. So you want to send a JSON to a server, and a server will also send data back through that JSON. This is what a JSON looks like. You have the braces, which is the root of this JSON. And then you have these keys in this JSON. You have the name key, which corresponds to the string intro to iOS development. You have a number key, which is 1998. And then you have an instructors array, which contains objects of instructors, which in this case, you have a key name, and you have Gonzalo Gonzalez. And then you have another key, which is ID, and that corresponds to the net ID GG387, which is this string. So how would we make HTTP requests in our iOS apps? It seems like to send this thing over is going to be complicated. You're probably going to make complicated code, and that doesn't sound fun at all. But this is why we use external libraries. What we're going to be using is AlamoFire, and this external library is just going to abstract all of that away for us, and we're going to be using something very nice. We're not going to have to handle any of the low-level code. We're just going to need to interact with AlamoFire, and it's going to do most of the work for us. And that's a good thing about external libraries. Sometimes you want to write code, and it might seem like someone else may have already written it. Say you want to make something with animations, or maybe you want to try making some map, right? There's already libraries out there for us to use. So it's best to just integrate those libraries into your code, and you'll be able to speed up development. And it's just going to make your life much easier. So here are some examples of some external libraries. In Eatery, we use hero animation. So whenever you press on an Eatery, it actually pops up, and that animation is controlled through that external library. Google Maps is another external library that you can integrate with your app. And then we also have Lottie, and it's basically just a bunch of animations if you're trying to make a cool loading screen. So all these are external libraries that you can install. But how exactly do you install them? Another kind of external library is a UI kit, and you can use UI kit inside of your app already, but these libraries you need to install through something called CocoaPods. So CocoaPods are a library manager, and it's similar to if you use Python or Node.js before. You can, whenever you do pip install in some library or npm install in some other library, that's the same thing with CocoaPods. It's just the way you do things for Xcode. And it's going to let you manage all your external libraries and use any other kind of libraries that you want to use. So how do you use CocoaPods? You're going to need to install through this command sudo gem install CocoaPods, and then you want to use pod init, and that's going to create a pod file for you. And what that pod file looks like is like this. This is a pod file from one of our older apps. You see they all say pod, and then you'll see the first one's AlamoFire. And you're going to want to install that pod before next lecture because we're going to be using that one a lot. And to install one of these pods, you just need to run pod install. And note that the first time that you install a pod, it's going to create a new project called a .exe workspace, and you need to work in that file. Otherwise, your pods won't work. You're going to need to import these pods using like import Alamo file, for example. And if you're not in the .exe workspace, it's going to give you an error, which is why you need to work in that one, because that's the one that has access to your pods folder. There is a link that I'll include at the in my Slack message, which is going to take you somewhere on the website that has a more in-depth way of installing this. And now let's talk about closures. So closures are going to be used on networking with Alamo Fire. But we're not going to talk too much about the networking aspect right now. We're just going to keep it simple and just talk about what exactly closures are. So closures are, you can think of closures as if you've used anonymous functions. They're basically that. It's just blocks of code that you can use around your code. And it's just going to make your life easier sometimes. So here's an example. So in this closure, if you look at the second one first off, this is how you would make an adding function in Swift, right? You have your parameter, and you have a first and a second integer parameter, and that returns another integer, and you're just adding first and second. And then to call this function, you just put the name of the function, and then you'd pass in a parameter with first and second, and then that should give you 3. For closure, if you look at the first one, you don't specify parameter names. You have an int, comma int in parentheses, and then there's a arrow, just like with functions, and an int. So this is the type of the closure. It's going to be some closure that takes in 2 parameters. As you can see, the closure also has the braces. And the parameters are first and second in there. And then you have an in keyword and then return first plus second. So it looks very similar to a function. We can look at some applications of how closures can be very useful. If you've heard of higher order functions like map, filter, sort, you'd use closures to do these. So they take in closures so that you can have them do specific things. For example, we have a list here of some negative numbers and some positive numbers. And say I want to convert this list into a list that has falses and trues. It's false if the number there was negative, and it's true if it's positive. So in this case, you'd want to map this list with a closure that takes in a number and returns a Boolean. And you want to return numbers that are greater than or equal to 0. Because if the number is greater than or equal to 0, for example, if we're looking at negative 23 right now, that number is not greater than or equal to 0. So you should return false, and that's going to replace the negative 23 with false. Same with the numbers that proceed. 10 is greater than or equal to 0, so it's going to return true, and now 10 is going to be replaced with true. Say we want to use filter. Let's say I have a list of values and I only want to return the odd values. That means that I want to filter out the values that are even. And I can use value.isMultiple of 2. If that happens to be true, I want to filter that one out. So this would filter out all of our even numbers. So let's start with a demo, and we're going to be using Postman, which is going to make visualizing our HTTP requests very easy. And this is a very useful tool to use during your hack challenge when you're interacting with your backend members. So let's go over to Postman. So first, let me open up Postman. You can install Postman on the website. This is what your Postman environment is going to look like. Some things you want to do first. We click here, go to settings, and we want to go to themes and turn on dark mode. You always need to do that first. Okay, so to get started, you can just close the overview and click on plus. And now this is where we're going to be working most of the time with Postman. So if you see here, we have a GET request. If I click here, I'm going to see all the possible HTTP requests I can use. So remember, we're going to be using GET, POST, which is going to turn this yellow. I'm going to use delete, which turns this red. But what exactly are we going to interact with? So for this example, I'm going to be using one of my old backend hack challenge projects that I did a year ago. And I will include the link in the description for this. But what we're going to do is you want to clone this because we're going to run this locally. So by running locally, what I mean is that if you run it locally, it's going to be running on your machine, so you can access the server from the same machine that you're using. So your client and your server are in the same place, so you should be able to talk. But if you're going, when you actually do the assignment, you're going to be using a server that is deployed, meaning that you can access this server when the server is far away from you, right? So if you haven't used Git before, what you want to do is you want to click on the green button, and then you want to click on this right here to copy this. And what we're going to do is I'm going to go back to here. Also, this isn't necessary to do. It's helpful to know how to do this when you're running, when you're doing your hack challenge, in case you need to test the routes locally, in case your backend members haven't deployed the server yet. So it is good to try this out. If you have any difficulties, because everyone's computer is different and there might be some issues I don't cover here, you can feel free to reach out to me and I can help correct those issues for you. But what you want to do is in the directory that you want to type in git clone and you want to paste this. And then you'd hit enter. I'm not going to do that because I already did that. So I already have it on my machine. So there's no need for me to do that. But once you do that, what you want to do, if you type in ls in that directory, you're going to see three things. I want to change my directory into the source by typing in cd space source. And then over here, if I type in ls again, I'm going to see a bunch of things. There's one relevant thing that I want to use, which is my requirements.txt, which is going to install a bunch of external libraries, just like how we talked in this lecture. So to do that, first, I want to install something called virtual env, which is going to help me make a virtual environment, which is going to organize all these external libraries that I have inside of a folder, so that is not on my global machine. So if I don't want to use those libraries in a different project, I don't need to go into my computer and delete them. It's always going to be in this folder. So all of my projects have separate different, they have separate external libraries associated with them. It's just to keep things organized. And so you don't have a bunch of clutter on your global, on the global side of your machine. So we do that by typing in pip install virtual env, and we hit enter. And I already have it, so it's going to install properly for me. And then what you want to do after that is type in the name virtual env, and you want to type in the folder name. I'll type in venv or venv. So if I type in ls again, I'm going to see that I have this right here. So now that I have the folder for my virtual environment, I want to actually go inside of my virtual environment. To do that, I need to type in dot space, and I want to go into venv, it's bin, and activate. So when I hit enter, you'll see here it says base. Now it says venv, meaning that I'm inside of my virtual environment. And now I can start installing external libraries without worrying it being in on my global environment, because now it's going to be all in this folder. I can delete it later if I want to. So to do that, I want all of my external libraries are in this folder requirement, are in this text file requirements.txt. So to access them, I can just do pip install. I want to do -r for recursive because I have a list of libraries that I want to get from there, and type in requirements.txt. So that's going to install everything into my virtual environment. I can just wait till that's done. Great. And now what I want to do ls again. I have this file called app.py. So I want to start the server locally. And to do that, I just type in Python app.py. And it looks like I have an issue here. I'll correct this offline. Okay, I'm back. Turns out it was just an outdated library, so I fixed it. So if we go ls again, all I need to do is type in python app.py, and then your server will start here. So whenever this is like this, that means your server is running locally. You don't have to worry about correcting the issue. I'll make sure that all of the issues are taken care of before you're able to access this if you would like to follow along with this demo. So now that the server is up, how do I actually send HTTP requests to it? What am I going to send? Like, what does the server accept? And I mentioned the word API before. An API is basically how a client interacts with a server. So if the client wants to interact with the server, the client needs to check the API. Well, the client wouldn't check the API. You'd check the API, and you look at what the server will accept for requests. And then you want to implement that in your networking. And then when your client sends a request using that API route, the server is going to recognize it and do what it needs to do to get your request fulfilled. And it will respond to you with a response. So let's look at the API for my project. So you can just click here on API documentation. And this is going to be similar to how you're going to be looking at your backend members API specs for the hack challenge. So we're just going to be focusing on users right now. So if we look here, we have a get all users, and that's using a get request, because when we want to retrieve something, we're going to retrieve using get. And it looks like this is what we need to access. So this is called an endpoint. And to use an endpoint, what we want to do is we want to access this is the endpoint. We want to use our endpoint, and then we want to access this, which is our path. So we have an endpoint, which is going to be the IP of the server. For example, if you want to use the endpoint www.google.com, and if I run a get, then I'm going to get a whole bunch of stuff here. If I preview this, this is actually Google. So whenever you type in a URL into your search bar, you're going to actually be calling a GET request. And that GET request sends you all the code that displays what Google is. So we're going to be doing the same thing here. So first, let's run a GET request on this URL. So let's copy this, and let's see what appears. Run GET, and this looks a little bit weird. If we click on raw, this is artificial invasion. That's the name of my project. And whenever what I coded is I would return this string if somebody would call a GET request on this endpoint with a path, which is nothing, right? So this is working as expected. Now what we want to do is we want to get all users. So to do that, this is the path I want to use on my endpoint. And so I would type in API/users. If I hit get, it's going to give me success true, and there's nothing there because we don't have any users right now. Now this doesn't look very great. We can click on pretty print, and it looks like it's still not great. This is of type HTML. We don't want HTML, we want JSON. So we're going to switch over to JSON. So this looks much nicer and is more readable. So right now we don't have anything in our data, and so we do want data. So how do we create something? Let's go back to the API spec and see what there is. And right here, it looks like we can create a user. So let's take a look at that. So this says we want to post, and it's using the same path as before. So technically, all I have to do is switch to post. And let's try that out. And now I've got a whole bunch of issues. So the reason for that, if we check the terminal too, you'll have issues too. The reason you're getting this issue is because you want to press backslash here, because you want to make sure that your routes, your paths end with the endpoint. You want your path to be the same as it is here. And this one has a backslash, so you should also put a backslash here. Let's try posting again. Now we're going to get a different error. And this one is actually more readable. This is a JSON decode error because it's expecting something, but it got none. The reason for that is because we're posting, but we're not really given any information. If we look back at the API spec, we're going to see that in our requests, we need to have some username key that has some input for your user. And to do that, we can click on body. If we click on body, we want to click from none to raw. And then you want to switch this over to JSON so that it's easier to write. So you just put the braces, hit enter, and the formats it for you. can type in username, and we want some kind of username. So let's just put my GitHub username, which is Chalo2000, and let's try to post this. And it worked out nicely. It looks like it's still HTML, and that's going to get annoying. So we can click here on the settings. And if I see language detection under general, I can click here, click on JSON, should be good. So if I were to do this again, it looks like it worked. So it looks like my ID is 2, and my username is Chalo2000, and that seemed to work. And then it looks like these empty things, which I wasn't really expecting. But if you go back, this is when you request something, the expected response would be this, which is what is showing up here. So the API spec seems to be accurate. Also, there's these codes here. These are just some status codes that you don't really need to pay too much attention to, but you can also verify here to see if you're getting the right status code. And then this would be the case where you have a bad request. It would seem like if I were to pass something wrong like this, to click post, seems to give me a 400 bad request. So the API spec is basically describing what will happen and what you need to do to get to that point. So let's fix this here. So actually, let's try to get again. Let's see if I were to run a get, it doesn't matter to have a body, it's not going to pass that over. You don't need to worry about that. You only need to provide a body if it's requesting one. If you provide a body and it's not looking at your body, it's not going to do anything. So now with get, let's hit send again, and looks like it created 2. The reason for that is because I created 1, then I switched over to JSON, I clicked send again, and it created the second one. But I don't really want this second one. I want to get rid of that one. So how would we do that? Looks like I can delete a specific user. And now it looks like I have a /API/users, which is what we had before, but now there's this braces UID thing. What is that? So if I go to delete, delete is here. What I want to put here, what UID corresponds to, UID stands for user ID. And you can see that the user ID is going to be here in my response. So the way CRUD APIs usually work is you want to provide IDs. And if I provide the ID of what I want to delete here, it should delete it properly for me. And it looks like the response is that it's going to return it for me. So let's try to delete, let's see, I want to delete the second one. So just put a 2 here. Let's try to delete. Looks like I'm getting an issue again. And remember, that's because we need to have a trailing slash. So always make sure to put that trailing slash. Click send again, and it looks like it says success true. Let's check to see if it actually deleted it. So go back to get. It looks like it did. So it seems to be working. Let's try one more thing. Let's create another user. I'll call them Joe. And I'll hit, well, I want to create a user, so I want to go to posts. And this is the same path for posting. I click send. I'm going to get ID of 2, and now my username is Joe. And I want to get everything now. And here we go. So now we have 2 users again. But let's say I don't want to get every user. Let's say I want to get a specific user. There's also a route for that. Get a specific user. And it works just like delete, but instead of deleting, we're going to get. So if I were to pass in 1, put the trailing slash. If I click on get, it should get just Chalo2000. And that seems to be working. And it looks like there's no braces or no brackets. And that's how the API spec describes it. So you want to always refer to your backend member's API spec, because this is how you should expect things to be working. Now, of course, sometimes there's things on the API spec that aren't necessarily accurate. And that's why I highly recommend that you use Postman, because you can verify 100% what happens if you hit the server with a specific HTTP request. And this is guaranteed. There might be something different here, but whatever you end up getting if you run Postman like this is what you're actually getting. And that can really help you when you're trying to debug for networking. So those are the basics, how to use Postman. We can try one more API. we're going to be using something called RoboHash. And what RoboHash does is it just generates different images based on the text that you pass it. So if I were to type in, say, ABC, and I can click on generate, this is the link that it's using. It's the link of this website, and then there's a /ABC. And remember, this is your endpoint, and this is the path after that endpoint. So if I were to do ABCD, I'm going to click on generate, and it creates another robot for me. So let's try playing around with this. Copy this, and I'm going to go over here. So let's just hit get and see what happens. Looks like it gave me this thing. There are many robots in the source, but here's one. Reload for another. Okay, that's interesting. And well, it looks like there's other stuff here too. Well, it looks like we were able to hit the endpoint properly. So let's try typing in, say, ABC like we did before, or maybe ABCD and see if we get this robot. So let's try this. Okay, it looks like we got a robot. Doesn't look like the same robot. We did get a robot, so that's fine. So this seems to be working. Though there is one interesting thing that you can also do with this website, and that is you can have different kinds of robots to show up. So how would you get a robot like this, but then get a different kind of robot? To do that, they're using this question mark and key value format. And these are what you call query parameters. So for example, if I were to do, let's say we can just use this. I'm going to copy this, and if we were to paste this like this, or to generate, this is what happens. Now I'm using something from set 2, and I can do set 3 here too, or set 4, or set 5. And it looks like set 5 is not working. I can do 1. Set 5 is just people. It's not actually listed down here. I'm not sure why. But the way query parameters work is you want to press a question mark, and then you want to put your parameters. And then whenever you want to have other kinds of parameters, you can put an and symbol, and you can start putting other things. There's a way to specify your size too. We're not going to do that. So we want to try doing that on Postman. So how would I do query parameters on Postman? Well, the easiest way is you just click on parameters, and then you can type in your key and value here. So if I were to type in set here, you'll notice how the URL is actually already formatting it the way you need to format it for query parameters. And then I can type in set 2, and now we can try that out. And it seems to be working properly. If I were to type in, say, size, and then I can type in, what was it, 200 by 200. Try that, and it sent me a smaller one. Can put in obnoxiously long one, and here we go, very stretched out robot. So this is how you would do query parameters. And if you were actually to search things up on Google, you'd also be able to see the query parameters here. You'd see some Google search. I think it is https www.google.com, and then there's a search, and then you can check it out on your own time. It have a question mark, and then it has its own set of query parameters. So normally query parameters are used for search routes. If you want to specify specific things, like maybe you want to get some users past a certain date, or you want to pass in a restriction on the kinds of users that you want. This is how you would do it. Maybe searching a specific user. You can use query parameters for that. So that's basically all I have for Postman. So let's go back to the keynote. And I did mention that you have an assignment. It's actually an extra credit assignment. So there is no assignment for this week, really. If you are struggling in the class right now, you need a boost, I highly recommend you do this assignment. I also highly recommend that you do this assignment, even if you're not struggling, because this assignment will really set you up for the next lecture. This extra credit assignment is going over closures. It's very nice to know closures in Swift because it can help you do some handy things without bothering with for loops. And you're also going to be interacting with the API that you're going to use for assignment 7. So you might as well do this assignment and then get familiar with what you're going to be interacting with, because then you're going to have a feel for how the API is, and you'll be able to set everything up properly so that your next assignment should be much quicker. And also remember to set up CocoaPods. I will include a link in the description to the CocoaPods tutorial on how to install a CocoaPod. Please reach out if you're having issues installing Alamo Fire, because it is absolutely necessary for the next lecture. So yeah, thank you for watching, and I'll see you all next lecture.